bartender, did someone die here recently? And he said, no, not someone die here necessarily, but there was a wake here on Monday, and the family sat in the booth where you're sitting. So I do believe, and this was like Friday, so, a few days later, I do believe that he'd been just, ever since the wake, he'd just been kind of hanging out, feeling lost, and then I showed up and was able to help him.
It's funny because, I was actually doing a radio show 2 or 3 years ago. They all blend together, right? A few years back. And something similar to this happened to me because I lived down the street from a hospital. There's a hospital where I was born that's literally 2 blocks away.
Wow, yeah.
So I'm doing this, I'm talking about what I've seen. And I was on a radio show with a guy by the name of Peter the Psychic Chef, and I don't know if you know him. He's fabulous. I love him. He's actually a chef, and he's psychic. He lives in Australia. He's an incredible guy. And he says, well, they see you. They see your light, right? They see your light because it's kind of like, lightning bugs. They just lights up to them. So I think that's what's happening. So it gets into a lot of funky types of existentialist questions. Were you drawn there for a specific reason? What's the magnetic attraction? There's all those kinds of things. But again, in the normal day-to-day course of one's life, it's hard to explain these things to people. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk to you about what it's like when people, we're actors. We're going to have a little scenario. We're going to role play here a little bit.
Okay.
Or there's somebody giving you a scene. Okay, so you're at this place, ready to escort the dead into the other world. What most women do in LA, right? And you're there. And someone who sees you, they don't see you escorting ghosts from one sphere to another. They go blonde. And so when they start to talk to you, maybe they go, oh, hi, what are you doing? You go, well, I am here. I was trying to figure out because there was this man that he died and he was here and he'd been stuck here for 2 or 3 days and he didn't know where to go. And what do they do? It has to totally, because I can just see you doing this. I love this. So when you have people who are trying to engage you because you're a blonde or whatever it is that they see, right? That they're on the surface thing, and you start to tell them when their head stops spinning, what is that like for you? Is that a fair question? First?
Yeah. Well, I think it really depends on their reaction because for the most part, people are just, first of all, incredibly curious. It starts like 20 questions. As soon as I tell them what I do, then it's like there's so many questions. I think sometimes they can't even control, like, which question do I ask? There's this full of questions. And then there are, conversely, others who just are immediately turned off or, don't believe it or whatever. So thankfully for me, I was fairly surprised when I started sort of coming out of the closet psychically and acknowledging this publicly that most people just are curious and want to.
Hello?
Lori, more.
There she is.
That was crazy. Yeah. Sorry, did it cut out?
Yep, you cut out for just a second.
Okay. I was just saying I had a lot of fear about being judged or that people would think I was crazy, and that prevented me from sharing it for a really long time, but it turned out to be a sort of false fear that happens very, very rarely for me.
No, that's beautiful. I live where I was born, same town. The hospital up the street, I was born there. And on the other side of the street, I went to high school there. So, but when I came back here after all these years, and I don't let people, they know me as like, whatever, like ex-jock from 100 years ago. That's how they see me, and that's the way they need to see me. I don't want them to know what I do because I don't want to be bothered with it. So when it's like when I want to be that, then I can go someplace and I can step into that role. it's not so easy, I don't think, to just sit down and start having this conversation all the time. I don't think. And so that's also one of the advantages. Again, the reason I believe everything has a purpose, right? And I believe that people are given certain types of attributes compatible with the type of thing that they're supposed to be doing. So you and Megan, what you look like, how you come across, all those things are by design, right? I don't mean to be a dead horse here, but I think that they're related. So for you to have these types of conversations, the response is going to be different than when I'm having this conversation, because people are trying to understand you and put you in a certain kind of context. And I think that flipping the switch there a little bit is part of the beauty of that. That's why I'm curious, when people, like, it's interesting, when you talk about being a straight male psychic, because in psychic world, that gives me a certain amount of power in a way. It gives me an extra thing. But when I go out of it, it works against me. Right? Because, and I've had this conversation with several people, and I'll say it again, which sounds like the strangest thing ever. But I believe that being a male psychic is comparable socially to being a female sex worker. And I'm going to explain why. Let me explain why. Because in psychic world, it gives me a certain amount of power, interpersonal power. Maybe I was a psychic, but it gives me a social power in that particular arena. When I leave it, that's used against me. Okay? Being a psychic is considered not very much like a boy-like thing. A woman who's maybe an actress or whatever, she has a power way beyond what the men have. But when she leaves that world, then that's used against her. Where a man that is powerless, basically, if he's in that world, there's a certain sort of social status in his environment that goes with that, just as there might be for women who are professional psychics amongst other women. So I think there's a kind of a camaraderie between. Does this make sense? Do you follow what I mean with this?
Yeah, no, I think I hear what you're saying, and I would agree that it is, and there are very different issues for male versus female psychics. So I think I get your drift.
I mean, it's an odd analogy, but the reason I bring it up is that part of the reason that I hide from it is that to go out into, quote-unquote, the normal world, it's considered like not just odd, but sort of not manly, right? So that's the interesting dynamic with it, is that it gives you a certain amount of uniqueness within the world, but when you go out of it, it makes you sort of an outcast in some sense. And I think that's because I have a lot of friends who are, women who are models and fetish models and all these things. And so there's a certain sense that when they try to integrate that into the rest of the world, that aspect they have to hide, right? So they can't really embrace it so much. So, I mean, that's really all I'm bringing up.
That's interesting, though, that you bring up fetish modeling, because I'm a fetish model as well. And one of the messages that I've gotten is part of what I'm here to help do, and what's really needed right now, is for all of us to just kind of throw out these different labels and just honor and be whatever it is that we are in all those various facets of ourselves, instead of trying to compartmentalize or like, okay, well, if I'm a psychic, that means that I'm like this, and I'm, angelic, and I only wear white clothing or whatever, that we are all like the creator. We all can manifest and create in a lot of different areas, but also to honor the various aspects of ourselves, regardless of whatever our sort of package is, our physical form is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the beauty of it. Again, I'm from a totally different generation, right? I mean, I'm probably older than your parents. And so there's a different different evolutionary cycle, and I think that's also what's important about, again, like you and Megan and other women in your age group, that there is a different set of expectations. There's a different social dynamic, just in general, and there's an openness to it that's way different than when I was young. At the same time, there's a funkiness to it that's different than when I was young too. I mean, it has both good and bad.
Sure.
There wasn't a lot of information. You know, I mean, I had to go to California when I was in my 20s. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't New Age bookstore. Those things didn't really exist, right? So you had to take a different path. Now there's information everywhere, but because there's information everywhere, it's just as complicated to find what you need because you have to sort through as much. For back then, you had to find it. You didn't have to sort through it. You had to track it down. So it has a similar motivation, but a different tactical kind of way of approaching it.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. No, and I do feel very blessed to be, you know, having my gifts in this time. In fact, a lot of psychics, myself included, have had persecution in previous lives for our gifts, because I believe a lot of our gifts are soul gifts. I mean, there are certain things that you might have more in one life, but if you're psychic, I believe it's kind of like a soul thing. You're a psychic soul. And so I know I've been burned as a witch, and I've been beheaded, and all kinds of persecutions that I've had for being different. And it's really lovely to be living in a time, especially more recently here and in a place in the United States where, not only am I not being persecuted, but people actually think it's interesting, want to hire me. It's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance. And you bring up another interesting concept, which is reincarnation.
Yes.
How do you feel about reincarnation? I mean, what's your opinion of that?
Oh my gosh, I absolutely believe it. And before I had any training or knew anything about this stuff in terms of, what people believe happens or any research, reading, etc., I have past life flashes since I was little. And in fact, I associate more on a soul level with masculinity. Like a lot of dreams, I'm a man. So, and I know I've been a man a lot. I believe I've been a man more than I've been a woman, and I'm here to kind of balance that out and honor the female side. I'm dominant, I'm a dom, so that's another sort of more traditional, in quotes, male aspect thing. So I very much believe in it, and I've been to places where I've had past lives, and it's like I can feel the energy of those lives, and I've also known things about places that I wouldn't have known or had fascinations. Like I was super obsessed with Egypt when I was a little kid. I think when I was like 8 years old, I went as Cleopatra for Halloween. Like that's not normally a child's, they're like a princess or something. And I was Cleopatra.
Did you have memories when you were a little girl? I mean, were you one of those? Because I was, and this was in the 1950s. But when you were a young child, did you have these flashes then?
I had little bits of flashes, and then what I also had were dreams where I think that the recurring themes from lives would come up. So like one of my recurring sort of nightmare themes was, drowning and there's sharks all around. And I believe that happened in a life. And that's why it was such a horror for me, like a real fear.
Yeah, I agree with the male aspect. I mean, I think that you are primarily a male. I mean, you certainly if you look at you wouldn't think that, but if I think of you, I think of you primarily as a male. And, I did a movie a few years back, and one of the actresses in this film was a really beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful Russian actress. Her name is Natasha Blasik. And after the shoot, I did past life regressions, for some of the people in the cast, and I saw Natasha as a male soldier. That's the way she showed up to me. And she's talked about this. She's done interviews and talked about me doing this with her and that's how she saw herself. And it was interesting to me how she identified with that so strongly. And she was a very young, she was just barely 20 when she did this film. And it's a fascinating kind of dynamic when you look at gender inversion, and you look at trying to balance